Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us here today. On behalf of the Web Science Institute and the India Centre at the University of Southampton, it's my very great pleasure today to welcome ElsaMarie D'Silva, the founder and CEO of the Red Dot Foundation India and president of the Red Dot Foundation Global in the United States. Having quit her previous highly successful job in aviation, Elsa founded the Red Dot Foundation after the brutal gang rape of Jyoti Singh on a bus in Delhi in December 2012. Her aim was to launch Safe City, a crowd map for sexual and gender-based violence. Safe City is now one of the leading platforms to crowdsource personal experiences of sexual violence and abuse in public spaces, a global pandemic which impacts on about 1 in 3 women around the world. And indeed, Safe City has gone from strength to strength. Since starting in 2012, it's become one of the largest crowd maps on the issue in India and abroad, engaging over 750,000 citizens and the police to be agents of change. Elsa is listed as one of BBC's India's top 100 women, and her accolades include the Government of India's Women in Transforming India Award and the Digital Woman Award in Social Impact by She the People. So the Web Science Institute and the India Centre are really both honoured and privileged to welcome Elsa to our distinguished lecturer series today, and we're very, very much looking forward to Elsa's talk. The Q&A is open now, so we'd love you to start entering your questions as they occur to you throughout the lecture, and then after Elsa's finished speaking, we'll turn to the Q&A, and obviously you can add more questions as we go through. So very warm welcome to Elsa, over to you.
Thank you, Pauline, and I'm really thrilled to be speaking at this lecture. Good evening from Mumbai, and happy Diwali to those who just celebrated. I have a presentation, so I'm going to share my screen. Great. So, as mentioned in the introduction, I started Safe City actually, and Red Dot Foundation is the organization that comes later. We started as an immediate response to the gang rape of Jyoti Singh. I remember in December 2012, when this incident occurred, the country was in shock. It was terrible news that such a brutal act could happen. And it wasn't in one of the dangerous parts of town. It was 8 p.m. This woman had gone with a male friend. She was a physiotherapy student, 23 years old, went to see this movie, Life of Pi. And after the movie got over, they boarded a bus, which they thought was safe because it had a few people on it. Little did they know that those people were a gang of men who were out to cause mischief. And during that bus journey, they tied and beat up her male friend, and then they went on to gang rape her multiple times in the moving vehicle, and then inserted metal rods into her body, pulled out her inner parts, etc., and left her to die on the streets. And this was extremely brutal. So when I heard this news, I was actually part of the aviation industry. I was vice president network planning for one of India's largest airlines. And I was also at a moment in my personal life where I wanted to do something different. And when this incident happened, it kind of got me to focus on the issue of sexual and gender-based violence prevention. And that's how we ended up launching Safe City. Safe City is a crowd map for sexual violence prevention. Now, you may say, but why did I choose that topic? And the reason being that I'm a survivor myself, and that incident helped me remember all the other incidents that had happened throughout my life, witnessing masturbation on a public space, being groped on a train as a 13-year-old, witnessing and experiencing sexual harassment at the workplace, and so on and so forth. And I could also see that a lot of women and girls are held back in fully living their lives and quality of life, because their options and their opportunities are restricted. So my vision was to create safer and inclusive cities and communities for all women and girls to access their full potential. And we do that through education and advocacy using crowdsourced data for citizen action. And I know I'm talking to the web science department, so what we started was a crowd map, and the crowd map was really a way to, um, you know, uh, highlight the problem. So why is it a problem? Because it's a global pandemic. It's not only occurring in India. And on an average, UN Women says that 1 in 3 women experience sexual assault at least once in their lifetime. And when the incident with Jyoti Singh occurred, I turned to Google to find out the India statistics, and I could I could not come across anything other than this one statistic, which 8 years later we are still quoting today: 1 in 3 women, which is 33% of the population. In itself, it's high, but in India, it's even higher because this is a global average. In India, according to the National Crime Report Bureau, there's a rape every 20 minutes, and yet 80% choose not to report it officially due to socio-cultural factors. They are afraid of breaking the silence. They are afraid of bringing shame to themselves and their families. So shame, taboo is a big thing when it comes to sexual violence. And if you don't report it officially, it actually creates a data gap and makes the issue invisible. Now, I told you I was working in the aviation sector. My department used to plan the route network for Kingfisher. And what we were doing was using historical data of people's travel patterns to identify what are the trends and patterns for future. And we would make current and future business decisions based on that. And what we are doing with Safe City is nothing different. We are collecting the stories that people share with us. So they are historical stories, and we identify patterns and trends that are, corresponding to the location or the day of week, time of day, and try to make sense of it. But really, in my work in the last 8 years, I found that there is poor understanding of the spectrum of abuse. And most women do not have vocabulary for it. And in a way, by helping people categorize what they are experiencing, is also helping them reach out for the first help that you need. Because documenting it is, in a way, acknowledging this happened to me and I want to now do something about it. Just that act is so important. So there are many different forms of sexual and gender-based violence. There's non-verbal, verbal, and physical. All of this that I've put on the slide are crime under Indian law. And by documenting it, we are creating a database where we can understand this issue better and also understand the contextual aspect and nature of it. It is also available open source. Again, crime data in my country is not available open source. So in the US, for example, it is. So you could access it. But in India, if you wanted the crime data, you would have to make what is known as a right to information application in every police station, which is an impossible task. Or if you took that National Crime Research Bureau reports, you will get the data at the country level, maybe at the city level, but you won't get the granular level that we have, that we show on the map. And this data is really, really important because not only does it help you to understand what's happening where, but it can also be used to study the impact of what's happening when women experience this violence. For example, someone from Brown University wrote a research paper which calculated the cost of sexual harassment that women experience and the choices they make when they choose a university and the travel transport that they use. And she calculated it as about $300 that women spend on safer transport. $300 in my country is a lot of money. It's someone's full month's salary. It could be your entire travel budget for the whole year as well. We also studied women experiences and reactions when they experience sexual violence on a bus. So, for example, witnessing masturbation or touching and groping or commenting. And in 50% of the cases, women flee or freeze, which is not uncommon. So, freezing, when you experience it, is one of the three responses you can have: freeze, flee, or fight back. And very rarely do we fight back. And this data, in a way, helps you to fight back in different ways in what we call in aviation situational awareness. Your situational awareness is greatly enhanced by the understanding of the problem, and hopefully your reaction time to respond is quicker, but it also helps you respond in ways that can help you. So this information allows us to design safe and inclusive, safe cities and communities through this individual awareness and action. You have a safe space to report, you get education and information on rights. Also, often survivors find that they are alone when they report such violence. And it is a lonely journey given the shame, stigma, and taboo associated with it. And this is probably the only crime where you, as a survivor, have to prove your innocence while the perpetrator is emboldened because the ecosystem does not really put that person on the spot. But with this data, we found that you can actually engage your community. And your community could be, your college campus community, but it could also be your friends, it could be your residential association. We all have communities and we are part of communities. And what is that community's role in solving this problem? You now have a data set which you can take to them and ask and demand for support. You can start a dialogue in your community. And through that data, you can have that conversation where earlier, as an individual, it's hard to put it on the table because, again, the spotlight is often back to you and you're often asked to explain why you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or why were you wearing a certain piece of clothing, or maybe you did something to cause it to happen. But in this case, the community, we have found, has often had to take action because there is no excuse. And then what is the role of institutions and their accountability in governance? This is a data set that can be used with other data sets in a complementary way to enhance their situational awareness, but also drive decision making and have a gender sensitivity to policy making. They can allocate resources, for example, on safety measures, or they could also, reallocate resources in ways that make sense. So, for example, police is not always the answer, but sometimes knowing where to place the police personnel or what timings they should do around of that location is very important. This is what it looks like, a crowd map. You can zoom in right up to the street level, and each of these bubbles has stories in it. So you have 23 stories in 102, but they may be all different. And what we found is through this data set, we realized that what Delhi is reporting is very different from what Mumbai is reporting, and so on and so forth. And within a city, different places report different kinds of violence. So, for example, we have the center of Delhi, which is the business district, and that reports a lot of touching and groping. Maybe it's because of the anonymity a crowd offers. But in a more residential area, there may be petty robbery, which came up as a frequent category, and we had to add it to our map, even though it's not sexual and gender-based violence. But in India, a lot of women wear gold chains, and so you're vulnerable and you probably are attacked. So knowing what kind of violence is occurring where helps you also think about the solutions. And I have to tell you that with the University of Southampton in Bangalore earlier this year in February, actually on 14th February, which is Valentine's Day, we had a hackathon. We had a competition. And teams had to use the Safe City data to try and make sense of it. And it's always nice to find out what other people are seeing in the data. And one of the teams found that the data set was reporting violence in and around Valentine's Day. And we learned that there is a peak 1 week before Valentine's Day and 1 week after Valentine's Day. And this team dug deeper and tried to find out what is the cultural context. And they found that the week prior was what is celebrated on Indian campuses as Propose Day. That means if you like somebody, you go up to them and you propose to them. And maybe what was being reported was, instances of harassment. And 1 week after the proposed day, no, 1 week after Valentine's Day was something known as breakup day. Now, I had never even heard of these two terms, and it's been a while since I was on a college campus as a student. So honestly, I had no clue, but it actually turned out to be true and it corresponded to the data set. Now imagine if you had that information. As a student body, maybe you could institute precautions. Maybe you could work with your university or your campus security to, or maybe do some advocacy around it to let people know that they are not alone and that they can respond and they can, put forward a complaint and not feel ashamed, not feel that they have to put up with this kind of behavior. We work with youth. We have campus ambassadors on several college campuses. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had 3 students from the University of Southampton who wanted to work on their college campus. And they did a lot of advocacy as well. And we find that young people have they speak to others, their peers, in language that they understand, and they come up with the most innovative ways to address this issue. So by providing them a platform and the data, of course, to communicate with their peers, we've had very effective campus discussions. We have similar ones in communities. So I believe the data is very important and shouldn't only be for one class of people or one group of people. And this is also available to communities. Yes, these women that you see in the picture may not be literate. They may not even understand English. And so our teams translate the data in ways that they can understand, help them think through the trends, and invite them to think of solutions. And you can see that these are not only women. Everybody is in the room, old, young, women, men, boys, girls. And the idea is we have to work together to find these solutions. And in having these dialogues, we realize that, we are not putting people on the spot, and we're not looking at punitive measures, but we're looking at more preventive measures. And by engaging men and boys, we find that they actually have a sensitivity to not perpetrate these crimes. You see, in India, we don't have this as part of our formal education system, and not many families may speak about it as well. And if it's a taboo topic, there's not enough data, not enough information, not enough opportunities to have these conversations. So it's very important that we have these conversations. We teach people to talk to each other with dignity and also think through solutions. And police are one part of the solution. This is one of the events that we had where in this place in Delhi, the community invited the police to talk about women's safety. And the police said, oh, there's no issue here because there's not a single report filed in the police station. Of course, it's not filed. But they gave him 200 reports from our site, and they had to make a public retraction of their statement. But they also invited the community youth to come over and meet with them. And in fact, this police officer, he said, don't only come to the police station when things go wrong. Why don't you come even on a normal day and just have a cup of tea? And that was an eye-opener to these young people who had this impression that the police were totally unapproachable. And maybe they are, but in the interest of collective safety, shouldn't we be building those bridges and those relationships with our local security and safety personnel? And then, of course, having conversations using data as a base. What have we achieved thus far? We have over 18,000 reports. We are the largest crowd map in the world. Of course, we have concentrator data sets where we have teams in place working on the ground, or we have campus ambassadors. You will find scattered reports from all over the world, but it works best when you have concentrated data sets. We work with several country chapters. These could be nonprofits, some have been individuals as well. Collectively, we've engaged over 750,000 citizens to use this data in various ways. So from art on walls and public toilets, where we call them talking walls, where people express their feelings, especially about staring and commenting. And that has been very powerful in putting the community on notice and actually getting them to acknowledge there is a problem and do something about it. We also conduct workshops in schools, colleges, communities, and corporates on recognizing, identifying, and then preventing sexual harassment. We train youth leaders. We have a great presence on social media and more. I want to talk about how COVID-19 has impacted women and girls. So pre-COVID, we were mapping sexual violence in public spaces, but during COVID-19, most of us were locked up at home, and India had one of the harshest lockdowns in the world. And it's only been a month and a half that our lockdown has been lifted. And but people are still self-isolating. I'm still self-isolating as well. What we noticed during the lockdown is that there's been a lot of family violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, violence against the LGBTQ community, and online harassment as well. Our National Commission for Women reported a 94% increase in distress calls and messages in the first 3 weeks of the lockdown. So we had to start mapping domestic violence. And some of the realities are that, the ecosystem of support just doesn't exist. We have inadequate helplines, numbers are varied, not easily available. Shelter homes during COVID-19 was not available to women or anyone experiencing domestic violence who had to be taken out and moved to a safe space. In fact, in Mumbai, where I am, which is one of the largest cities in India, we have 2 one-stop crisis centers, and one of them is labeled as a female beggar's home. You can't really, send somebody there, even if they were accepting people, intakes. We couldn't even move to another apartment outside of your own because apartment complexes were not allowing new intakes without testing. There was no mobility. They had shut down all public transportation, and most women don't own their own vehicles. There was no access to internet and mobiles for women in India. Pre-COVID was low, and during COVID, many of them were left out of the system. And then you had spouses not paying alimony and support as well. So some of the things that we instituted was Safe Circle, which is a weekly online space. It's a peer space for survivors, and it's a listening circle. Every Friday we host it. We filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court of India to list domestic violence services as essential. And we also launched a change.org petition, which has garnered over 30,000 signatures. We hosted knowledge cafes to educate people on their rights. Also, online harassment is a big thing. And so far, we've trained over 7,000 people just in the few months of COVID. And we also have an inclusive cities agenda trying to unpack, what are the fault lines of our cities and how can we build back better? So we've been interviewing smart city CEOs, politicians, urban experts from all over the world and asking them things like, how can we, make sure our cities going forward are safe and inclusive for all? So I'm happy to take questions. We've been using this time to upgrade our mobile app. So on 25th November, check for it on Android and iOS, Safe City, one word. But you can follow us on social media as well. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Elsa. That was absolutely fascinating and really inspiring in terms of what you've achieved. Please do start putting your questions on the Q&A, although I see that some people have started putting them on the chat. So we'll turn to those in just a minute, but there's a couple of things I'd quite like to explore with you, ElsaMarie. Firstly, from what I understand, the data relies on individuals uploading their stories through an app on their mobile phones. And I was going to ask what the extent of mobile phone ownership is amongst women in India, and whether that presents a problem in itself if certain groups of women have no mobile phones themselves, or no access to mobile phones, or their access to mobile phones is governed by men. Have you kind of thoughts on that issue?
Yes, it is a major issue because less than 40% of women in India own a mobile phone. It's usually owned by a man, and then there's internet access, right? So in our experience, even if they have a device, they are only using it necessarily as a phone, not really to use all the apps. There's another statistic, according to McKinsey, women in India do on a daily basis 5.5 hours of domestic care work, which is another problem.
Yeah.
It's largely unpaid work in addition to a job that they hold, which means that technically they don't have any other time for themselves. And that also is a problem when it comes to dealing with sexual violence, because you don't have time for self-care, but you don't have time to even figure out how to seek that help you need. You have to take that time off from your busy schedule. So we have multiple ways to report. It's not only through the web app or the mobile app, but we have a missed call. A missed call in India is you call a number, it gets disconnected, and then we call you back. We have pen and paper forms, so you can put it in a talking box. In many places, that's what they've opted for. So basically, the tech platform should never be the end-all solution. Yeah. It should be a facilitator. And what we are doing is digitizing data that does not exist. Digitizing and collecting data that does not exist. We also did that with our friends in Kenya who work in Kibera. She, anyway, before I met her, had talking boxes in schools where children could put anonymous notes about what was happening to them. We helped her digitize it and then try to cluster them based on patterns that were emerging with in the data. And that helps her then engage with the authorities, whether it's the education board, because they were mainly schools. So either the children were being harassed by teachers or on their way to school. And the innovative ways that you can use the data to engage your community. She used community radio. She invited a religious leader to look at the data and talk to the men and boys, which as an authority figure had a big impact in that community. But she was also able to work with the school board. And today with UNFPA, she has these talking boxes in more than 45 schools. So I think the data, how do you collect the data is very important. Now I see there's a question on the privacy aspect of the data. Now, since we started, we have GDPR. So in our revised version of the app, the Safe City platform, you don't really have to sign up for it. So we are not asking you for any personal information. No name, no email, no mobile number. You don't have to sign up using any social media account or Google account. We are not even tracking IP addresses. It's completely anonymous. However, if you were to make an official report, because we do have that facility with some of the police forces and who, maybe corporates want to subscribe to that, if they make that official report. So you can have one track as anonymous reporting where we're not collecting any personal data. And then we also have the option to onboard partners like police, educational campuses, or corporates to have official reporting streams. And that they will have to part with personal information as per the requirement between that partner and the community. If there is an SOS functionality, then maybe we might ask for the mobile phone to call them back, or the location where they are. And we are looking at several different SOS functions, not just a panic button, but, really like, could we send somebody to pick you or a car to pick you or something like that. So it depends on that. But in general, the app, which is a global app, is completely anonymous. And before we publish the information on the front end, if the text of the complaint, which is a free text field, if they have put in personal information over there, that will be scrubbed clean. Also, in the new version of the platform, we have different reporting journeys. So if somebody picks physical assault versus, say, commenting, the questions that are asked subsequently are different, because maybe in a serious thing like physical, not everything is serious, but in a physical assault or in a rape, we want maybe to know if they went to the police or they went to a hospital. So those are like nudges. And the way we've designed the journey based on our experience and the feedback we've received, so it's an empathetic design through colors and questions and language, and not making it intimidating for somebody who has experienced trauma and is still reliving it.
Oh, thank you. I've got a few more questions about confidentiality, which I'll come back to, but there's quite a few questions from Professor Sri Kandia, who asks, first of all, what are the reasons for high numbers in the 3 geographical areas and the low numbers?
As I mentioned, those are places where we have teams working on the ground. So either we've partnered with colleges, or we've partnered with community-based organizations, and they've promoted the reporting on the platform.
Oh, I see. So really, it's just that you've got high capability in those areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sri also asks, is there any research evidence, numbers, etc., over the last 20 years in India? Have you managed to capture the impact, the successes that you've managed to achieve? Those are 2 separate questions, I think.
Yeah. So we are not a research organization, so we don't do research, but our data is being constantly demanded for research.
Yeah.
But, this is a set that doesn't exist. And I gave you 2 examples of how we've used research. One was our own women's responses to sexual harassment on buses. And the other was by Girija Borkar from Brown University, where she studied the impact of sexual harassment on women and girls in Delhi. And what she found was they compromise on the quality of their education by picking an institution close to their home because they don't need to travel far away. And the other one was they upgrade to safer transportation. Now, that is, again, not sustainable in the long run, because if women become a little financially independent, they want to take private transportation. And here, all over the world, you want people moving into mass transit and transportation. So it's in our collective interest that we resolve this issue, because we want women and girls to feel safe. We want them to travel at all times of day and night. We don't want them to limit themselves when they travel within a city or outside of the city and access opportunities to them. So I don't think I've answered his question well, but no, we don't do research, and we are happy to partner with people who want to do research.
Yeah, absolutely. The second question is, have you managed to capture the impact, successes that you've managed to achieve?
Yes. So we've captured it based on every neighborhood that we've worked in. So you can find it under the publication section on our website. So in short, I can tell you, wherever we've worked, we found that 95% of women and girls have a better understanding of sexual harassment and violence, and they feel confident of reporting it and taking action. So prior to our intervention, they weren't aware of the spectrum. See, everyone thinks of sexual assault, not everyone, but most people think of it as rape or sexual assault. But we normalize and trivialize the other forms of it: commenting, staring, touching, groping. And we think it's trivial, why is she making it an issue, grin and bear it, things like that. Yeah. But if you have a better understanding of how it impacts women, then you would treat it with the seriousness it deserves. So they have a better understanding of their rights, because India doesn't have a problem with laws. We have the laws for all those categories. But if you don't know that you can demand for punishment or justice, then you won't even make that attempt to make that official complaint. Having said that, most women and girls in our experience, they don't want to make an official complaint because they feel the system is insensitive and it's very lengthy. But they do want the situation to change. So you have a chicken and egg situation where how do you change when you don't have official complaints? How do
Yeah.
you make that change happen? And therefore, I do believe that this anonymous reporting is a critical component in policing security measures, and it shouldn't be used in a punitive way. We are very careful that whoever we work with, we always help them understand that the data is not meant to punish people, but it's meant to prevent. And we work on trends and patterns, not individual cases. We do have people writing in individually for the help that they need. We have partners who offer legal aid, counseling aid, but our core focus is working to solve the trend and the pattern.
Thank you. And obviously issues of privacy and trust are very endemic in terms of kind of data, digital data at the moment. And Bernard Roper is asking a few more questions about that issue. He asks, how do you manage trust in your data? And I guess that's one question, but this is an ally question. How do you protect against data vandalism and balance this with the need to believe those reporting sexual violence?
So at the moment, we've not had data vandalism. And that's because of two things. So our data is on secure servers. So that, but having said that, you cannot, nothing is foolproof anyway, but we've taken precautions. And the other is trust, because it's anonymous. So there's no way that anyone can trace it to anyone back again. And having said that, this time in our upgraded Safe City platform, we have made every attempt to not collect personal data. So it is completely foolproof in that sense. Yeah, so that's what I can say.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to have a call and with anyone to explain it with my tech team.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, if you want a greater understanding of how we protect the data on the servers, then yeah, we can have that conversation.
Okay. I was interested that you were talking to some of the smart city developers, because there's obviously quite a debate in terms of smart cities and how those are rolling out across the globe, but particularly in India and here, in terms of data collection. Because on the one hand, smart cities are going to enable much more enhanced data collection, which could be a real vehicle for women's safety. So there's obviously all sorts of ways that they can collect more data about who is traveling, where and when, and with what effect, and even using facial recognition as people are traveling through very crowded stations, etc., railway stations, bus stations, even on buses and trains, versus the kind of privacy concerns that data shouldn't, personal data shouldn't be collected. And I find myself having quite mixed feelings about this in terms of the gender issue, because on the one hand, much of transport data traditionally doesn't disaggregate by gender, so gender is invisible in most kind of transport data. So there's kind of pushes to demand that transport data and safety transport data is disaggregated by gender. But on the other, there's obviously concerns about invasions of privacy and people's security, etc. So this is quite a kind of long-winded question in terms of what do you see in terms of smart cities benefits for women and women's safety going forward?
I think there's a huge role to play. And like you said, they are already collecting all sorts of data, right? So we need them to understand, first of all, what data is important and why do they need to collect every single data. Like, you think that maybe you need that data, but you don't. So let's rethink what data needs to be collected and why are we collecting it. And second is, as you said, we don't have gender disaggregated data. And if you don't have it, 50% of the population live in cities, but they're not planned or designed for them. Whether it's transportation, whether it is streets, whether it is the office commute, whether it is the design of the subway. We have these, we call them subways. They are not subway train stations. They are like the underground path that you need to get to, maybe from one end of the street to the other instead of walking above. They make a tunnel below. And those are usually hotspots wherever they are and never used. So when we look at it, how can data really help? And of course, it has to benefit women, but how can it also not be used against women? So, for example, CCTV camera footage. Are you going to regulate women's movements or actually going to use it to make cities safer for women? And not also just use it to punish people without, putting the other modules in place, like awareness, advocacy, things like that. So in that sense, I think there has to be a whole lot of things, not just what data, but there has to be gender sensitivity of planning officials. There have to be more women in tech. There have to be more women design tech, because most of the time the tech designed to protect women for safety purposes is useless when it comes to women. Take, for example, those SOS apps, where you'll never find, the mobile phone, we don't have pockets. Nowadays, a lot of the dresses have pockets, but otherwise our clothes don't have pockets. And men too. So if you put a mobile phone in your handbag, and in times of a crisis, if you're going to look for that, you're never going to find it. So I find an SOS app very useless. But this is the first thing that a man will think of for a woman's safety and precaution. And that's what has happened, right? We need better tech that women can use and which will also be in their interest. And that's why I do believe our Safe City platform is well designed, and you will see it on 25th November, because it's designed in conjunction with a woman-led tech business. My friend Ritu David from the Data Duck, and we have put in a lot of thought into, how do we want this reporting form? One is from our own experiences, but two, from having worked on the Safe City platform for all these years, listening to feedback that we've heard from survivors, where even if it's anonymous reporting from the comfort of your home and your own laptop, it can still feel like a very lonely journey. So we've tried to make it really, empathetic to the survivor. And we've also given a few nudges, because it is a traumatic process. And I don't expect somebody who has not been through it to understand it. But data like this can help authorities with their decision making. And yes, smart cities. At the moment in India, there is no gender sensitivity. I have been working on the inclusive cities agenda as part of a UN Habitat program for the last 3 years. And I've been trying to ask people, what have you done from a gender sensitive lens? And they have no idea. Their idea of women's safety is fix CCTV cameras all across the city. That's not an answer.
No. So, I totally agree, and it's no different here. There's absolutely no gender lens when it comes to kind of smart city planning. So just kind of need to keep pushing at that door, because it's a tremendous opportunity. There's a question now from Claire Walsh, who's one of our Web Science CDT students. Are there differences in the population reporting these events? Is it a particular age group affected? Are you more likely to receive reports from younger tech-savvy measures? Sorry.
So I would say 50%. So I don't know because we don't ask that information at the moment. But from 25th November, that platform will ask age and gender. So we don't ask you if you're male, female. We expect everyone who's experienced it to report. We have some understanding based on the kind of reporting that some people are not women who have reported on our site, or if they've told us. But from our understanding, 95% of our reports come from when we do our in-person workshops or campaigns in communities. So by that, I would say 50% are young people from college campuses, and 50% would be from the communities. Again, over there could be older women and there could be younger women. And we worked across urban, rural, literate populations, different religious groups. And again, if it is highly concentrated with one religious group versus the other, it's really their cultural practices that influence the reporting. So prior to COVID, we were mapping sexual harassment in public spaces mainly. I mean, if somebody reported domestic violence or child sexual abuse, maybe it was different, but we were heavily focused on public space violence, and many women and girls are not allowed to go out or venture far from their home.
I was interested in the pictures of your education work in colleges and schools, and the numbers of boys and young men involved in those kind of education programs. Do you get any sense that there may be change amongst younger men in terms of attitudes to this issue?
Absolutely. I do believe that they want to engage, they don't know how. And so we offer them a platform where they can contribute to the cause in ways that they feel comfortable in. So for example, data analysis is one big way. So the data analytics, the tech project team, or even on-ground peer educators are young men. And it's interesting because when they see the data, they don't expect to see the diversity of stories or how it impacts women. And when women report that, maybe that touching and groping had such a big impact on them. Like some of the stories are 20 years old in such great detail, which tells you the emotional baggage that somebody has gone through, right?
Yeah.
And the clarity with which they report tells you that they've been carrying it for so many years, which is important, maybe not from a current perspective, but just for the understanding of the issue. And to give you an example, when we first started, one of my data analysts, he said, your data set is wrong. And I said, but why? And he says, the peak is noon. And I was like, yeah, so what's wrong with that? Between noon and 2 p.m. And he says, oh, shouldn't sexual violence occur when it's dark? And I was like, that's a myth, because women, we were mapping public space harassment, and most women and girls are out in daylight hours, and that's what they are experiencing. And I told him that, yes, actually, we are not mapping domestic violence, which is the highest form of sexual and gender-based violence, and that occurs in the comfort of your home, which is supposed to be a safe space, and yes, when it probably is dark, Not that domestic violence can't happen in the day, but his question was during the day, the peak is between noon and 2 p.m. And I said, yeah, but imagine if he was thinking that, maybe even the police are thinking that. And maybe they are not, looking at this crime rate, because obviously they don't have the data, right? So I think it's very, very important to understand what's going on. And this is probably the time of day when, the secondary school children are coming home, the primary school children are going to school, people are at the market or doing their chores, or maybe even going to work. And if we understood what was happening where, it it would make sense to everybody to then deploy resources accordingly, including how do you spend the budgets that are meant for women's safety or children's safety.
Absolutely. And that connects with the next question, which is from Les Carr, who's one of my colleagues in the Web Science Institute. He asks, is the trust in social institutions like the police high among Indian women? Is the trust in web institutions and platforms high among Indian women?
The trust between the police and community is very low. But at the same time, I think that should change. We shouldn't just accept it as low, right? And in our work, we found that when you engage with the police and can use the data, then they take you seriously. They treat you as somebody who has something important to say, because they can't dispute with the data. And that changes the dynamic completely between the community and the police. And that has proven to increase the trust between community and police. About platforms, I think they are here to stay. And COVID has taught us that. We are using platforms like never before. And it is in our interest that they are safe, they are responsive, trust is built in them. And we have to constantly work at the accountability and governance perspective. So I feel even if there's low trust at the moment, you should build the trust. And it is a great way because people do use different social media platforms. How can we use that to amplify the issue, make it more visible, and give voice to the women and girls who are otherwise socially conditioned to stay silent?
So Les says, so it's not a hashtag defund the police matter where there is bad faith.
I don't think it's that. And like I said, it's not, see, Me Too, okay? Take, for example, Me Too. What was the whole movement about? It was a call to action to say, we know this is happening, but nobody has the data for it. So go onto social media, share your account and put the hashtag Me Too. My only issue with that was that you couldn't use it in constructive ways, that data. It was, noisy data in a way. And yes, it did make the issue visible. A lot of important men lost their jobs, but it also became punitive, right? I want to use data as well for prevention, because this is not going to go away very soon. It's a power struggle. And it will manifest itself in different ways. We need to understand what's going on where and deal with it. Like during COVID-19, domestic violence went through the roof. And it's called a shadow pandemic. It was always a pandemic, But why were world leaders so surprised that it's happening? Because suddenly they had helplines ringing off the, charts.
Yeah.
But in my country, we didn't respond adequately. In places like France and even the UK, they made hotel rooms available. What will you do if a mother and her children are trapped in the home with a very violent person? Where do they go? But if people don't have an understanding of that issue and they act surprised when they get a phone call, and then you scramble for resources, that's hardly an adequate situation for 50% of the population. And we know why, when I say 50%, because we know it's a pandemic. So already it's at 33% as a global average. Do we really want to know, like, when, somebody close to us is experiencing it, for us to take it seriously?
Absolutely. I think actually one of the interesting things that the Web Science Institute is hoping to offer is more sophisticated data analysis of things like Twitter and the kind of Me Too streams on Twitter. And actually my colleague Les Carr is an expert on developing methods to actually use that data, be able to sort of pull down that data and use it in more productive ways. I'm really sorry, but time is running out. It's been absolutely inspiring, and particularly inspiring in terms of the multiple methods and the bottom-up methods that you're talking about for women to express their experiences and express their voices, and feel hopefully a bit more empowered about being able to use their experience to benefit other women and other men, to, you know, hopefully really do something about this global pandemic of not only kind of serious sexual violence, but just the constant drip, drip, drip of kind of abuse and oppression that women experience in their everyday lives. So I've got loads more questions I'd like to ask you, and very much hope that we can keep the dialogue going, and hope the relationship that you've now started to build with the University of Southampton can carry on, because I think the work that you're doing is very, very close to our hearts, not only within the Web Science Institute and also the India Centre, but across many of the social scientists and web scientists working at Southampton. So a huge thank you, Elsa, from all of us. And I know that if we were here in a real lecture theatre, we'd have an enormous clap at this stage. So a virtual clap from all of us. Thank you. And lots of thanks coming in from people on the chat. So please do read those.
Thank you very much. And I do want to say that, you know, I've enjoyed working with the University of Southampton, and I'm looking forward to partnering with the Web Science Department. And, you know, it's a very tough issue to work on. And I put in the chat section that for men and boys also, it's really hard to report. But we have to, at some point, have the courage to do that. And that's why our platform is really important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elsa.